Hello, and welcome to Why I'm Important, with me, your host, Alexander Fair. There are many days in the year that we follow for ethical, political, moral observance, but nothing matters to us as much, I think, as our own individual birthday. Our birthday is the one day of the year that we have to ourselves, that we're allowed to have all of the attention showered on us. And this may seem selfish and arrogant, and maybe even a little weird, but the most important thing to remember is that this day is not just ours. It's also a day on which many historical events have occurred. According to the Augustinian calendar, the 365 day a year sort of Roman calendar as we know it, there have been many events that have occurred, many of them important. For example, on my own birthday, there are three very key events that I feel have changed everything about human existence in modern and contemporary times. In 1878, Thomas Edison patented the phonograph, creating a massive change in everything to do with music. In 1945, we invaded Iwo Jima, the last island in the chain that we took from Australia to Japan. Essentially, what would be the last battle in World War II. Although some may argue that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were also one-sided victories. That's political, I don't want to get involved. And thirdly, the launch of Mir by the USSR in 1986, marking the first time that American astronauts were allowed to actually interact with cosmonauts, or Russian astronauts. Without Edison's phonograph, we would not have iPods. We would not probably have computers, honestly, because their use today as media devices are even more so important than they were at the time they were created. And because of Edison's creation, we've put now more an emphasis on attention to quality and attention to detail, and the idea that music can be created by people no different than you and I. There are a lot of programs now that allow emulation of phonographs and essentially their function. Without the existence of the phonograph, I truly don't think that music as a medium today would exist. On to the second topic, Iwo Jima. It was a notoriously bloody battle between the Japanese and the Americans. It was the last destination before Japan. It's about 500 miles away from Tokyo, and at that point the Japanese soldiers knew that it was a battle of desperation. There's a tremendously iconic picture that has several men holding up a flag on top of Iwo Jima, and there's also a memorial statue in Washington, D.C. with the same exact pose. And that picture represented the American triumph, I think, through the entire war. It really, I think personally, for me, it symbolizes the sort of assertiveness that we took. Even before we were very isolationist before the war. And then during the war, we took a very primary stance. We were the leading nation, essentially. We took over for the British as they were beginning to regroup. And I don't think that without our victory at Iwo Jima, the war would have gone on for another year and a half at least. And although a lot of people assume that the atomic bomb really did end the war, I truly believe that the strength of our own men really is a testament to our will, regardless of the atomic bomb. We could have won the war regardless. And I'm glad that we didn't have to sacrifice more people. But it is very important to know that Iwo Jima really is the last fight. And the third event was the launch of the Soviet Union's space station Mir. There had been other space stations, such as the Soyuz project, which meant salute or salutations in Russian. I think Skylab was our contribution to space at that point in time. Of course, we all know about the Star Wars program with the space-based laser that Ronald Reagan really wanted to put into space. But what matters here is Mir. Mir in the Russian language means unity or peace. Mir was the first effort by the Soviet Union to reach out to other countries. It realized it was very financially unstable at this point in time, and even though we still perceived it as a pretty big threat, especially following the Bay of Pigs and everything in the 60s, intermittent battles in Afghanistan in the 70s and early 80s even, we began to understand that it was time to stop fighting. Even before the fall of the Berlin Wall, we realized it was over. We realized the war was just coming to an end. So we took to our old fight, which was the space race, and we decided to become unified with Mir. So for the first time in ever, really, United States astronauts met cosmonauts, shook their hands, and lived with them even for months and months. It stayed in orbit for about 10, 15 years. 5 of those were unoccupied because of funding issues. But this is very important because this change is what's led to the politics of today. The compromise that people have led to us. This is very important to understand because this is what the politics of today are like. We have to watch out for the interests of not only ourselves, but we also consider those of others. Much like how the Russians allowed us finally into their space program. It's not perfect. It's not a complete, resolute change that happened with Mir, but it was enough to convince the United States that the war was over. This Cold War idea, it was finally time to put our differences aside and go ahead and work together as one. So, all right. Although these 3 events seem very unrelated, which they pretty much are, except the end of 1945 was probably the only thing that really connected to Mir. But the key connecting piece of this was that on my birthday, change was important, which is a word that I hold very dear to my heart. I believe that change is necessary, and there always needs to be a constantly revolving cycle of different people, different politicians, different ideas to circulate and to ensure that our species has a steady survival. Without change, we wouldn't exist. We wouldn't exist as we are today. We wouldn't exist even at all. We wouldn't have overcome all of the problems of Europe. We wouldn't have explored this country in the age of exploration even if we hadn't sought change. And that, I think, is the key part to understanding who we are in between cultures. And when we decide to discover who we are is when we are at our best. So, that's all for now. If you have any comments, problems, questions, negative opinions, feedback, just feel free to leave a comment in the video below. And you have a good one.